Everybody's here. All right. Welcome everybody to the final round of the 2008 CEDA National Tournament. What I love the most is that this is the last round I get to preside over, so thanks for your patience in getting this up. Our debate is on the affirmative, which is on my right, from Towson University, Devin Cooper and Davon Love. From the University of Kansas is Nate Johnson and Chris Stowe. I'm going to turn it on over to Towson University. Oh, wait, actually, I did something completely wrong. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to come back into the fold. There's something else I'm supposed to do up here, and that one other thing is to talk about the people who have the task of sitting here and judging this grand debate. So I'm going to start by going down here. First, from West Georgia, Mike Hester. Next, from Denver, Brian Schrader. All right, just clap once at the end, I guess, but you're just stiffing Reichley. Come on. And then from the University of Texas San Antonio, Matt Reichley. The University of Miami, Nicole Richter. From the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Jake Thompson. From the United States Military Academy, Christy Webster. Missouri at Kansas City, Malcolm Gordon. From Cal Poly Slow is John Hines. From Gonzaga is Jeff Bunton. No one clapped for Jason Russell from Oklahoma. And from Central Oklahoma, James Davis. With that, I now officially am done with my duties debate.
Me and Davon and I are just gonna thank people collectively, so we don't use his time at the beginning of his speech. But we would like to thank our mothers, Beth Skinner, Chris Bering, Shantae Diggs, Darrell Birch, Andy Ellis for helping us through all this time and his back problems. Shanara Reed, Elizabeth Jones, Tanya Green, RJ Green, James Rowland, whole Towson squad, all the judges that actually helped us get here. Baltimore Urban Debate League, of course, and all UDLs around the nation, and Towson University. So that's...
War in the mind over territory for the dominion. We will dominate the opinions, schisms and isms, keeping us in forms of religion, conforming our vision to the world church's decision, trapped in a section, submitted to committee election, moral infection, epidemic lies and deception, insurrection, on the highest possible order distorted, and I take reporters from hearing like underwater, beyond the borders, find a sin and disorder, bound by strategy and systemic depravity.
Like Warren says, it's freedom time. This is a war with the mind over territory, where we are at war to refer to the psychological destruction of noise and procedure of traditional debate. Never taught to engage in liberation as an escape. We will dominate the opinion, the oppressor, the people holding us to imprisonment as the topic steeple. We need to resist the systemic depravity before it spreads to all humanity. Debate teaching us us defend America as the exception, assimilating us to your sense of cultural deception, leaving us with self-hatred and lack of true self-perception. We need to engage in strategies that defy the imperial honesty, but truth comes being taught not to hear, and this activity tells us to fear. This activity has been one that has grown from the roots of white supremacy. The methods of debate that reflect the white ways of viewing the world, white ways of knowing. This method is presented in a privileged, illusory, fiat fantasy world that is uncritical of racism and white supremacy. Mills in 97. Thus, in effect, of racial matters related to racial conflicts, which prior to insignarities and the inverted epistemology, the epistemology of ignorance, the peculiar pattern of localized and global dysfunctions, producing the ironic outcome that whites will be unable to generally view to understand the world that they themselves have actually made. Whites will live in an inverted delusional world, a racial fantasy land, a consensual hallucination. There will be right methodology, invented Orients, invented Africans, invented Americans, with corresponding a-fabricated populations that never were. Shelke Hill did a study in this activity on 97 about black participation in the debate. He said the debate is like the public speaking classroom is grounded in Western ideology, frowns upon the African-American communication style. This makes it hard to recruit African-Americans in this activity. African-Americans see this activity as reflecting opposite of what they believe in. It becomes difficult for African-Americans to not suppress or give out their cultural beliefs in order to be successful. An internal struggle can emerge when African-Americans try to respond. The debate requires an approach that is not conducive to the image of African-Americans. We see the Western ideology as rampant within this activity. It's the white aesthetic that makes the white body and existence of the ideal debater the one that is normative. Peggy McIntosh writes in an article on Unpacking the Visible Net of primitive whites are taught to think their lives as morally neutral, narrative, average, and I saw idea that when they work to benefit others, it is work to allow them to be more like us. This makes white supremacy and white aesthetic of visible political system has shaped the modern world with this today. Charles Mills in 97. White supremacy is unequal system has made the modern world with this today. You do not find this term introductory or even advanced textual course of political theory instead. Undergraduate course of philosophy started with Plato or Aristotle. Though it covers more than 2,000 years of Western political thought, there will be no mention of the basic political system that has shaped the world for the past 100 years, and this omission is not accidental. Rather reflects the standard textbooks and courses have been designed and written by mostly whites who take their racial privilege so much for granted they don't even see it as a form of domination. Ironically, the system of domination by which white people have historically ruled over in certain important ways continue to rule over non-white people is not seen as a political system at all. It's just taken for granted. It is background against other systems which we see are political or highlighted. Tim Wise, a former debater, talks about a white like me in 2005. I say this process is white because it is experience that appeals the way white folks, especially affluent ones, typically afford and view the world. And it is equally Republican for people of color for the same reason. White folks have the luxury of looking at life, death, issues of war, peace, famine, unemployment, criminal justice is just a game. So for me to get up and actually debate about these things as already a white identified act. People of color not like this seem to want to argue the final points of whether we should or should not let people die in order to reduce overpopulation. The amoral credence that who believe that the shit that they write in books are saying is really good. Sources that says indictment sources are being racist. Credence has never really won a single debate right anywhere that keep being cited. Some of the main practices that we have become structural norms of this activity is the white aesthetic that we see. One, the sole reliance on traditional office. This act is taken away credibility from our personal experience, narratives, music, and lived experiences. It only tells us that knowledge that's producing this activity should be PhD office, JDs, MDs, and this method is epistemologically bankrupt. Two, the stance on the issue of white supremacy and how it has become essential to shape this debate activity through its norms and procedures, the way people talk about alternative debaters within this community. Three, is the use of objective disconnected narratives which creates an assumed fair standards to be applied to everyone in the context of debate. It tells us to divorce action from our political agency and endorse fiat, and to be devoid of personal conviction. We furthermore think that we must look to the historical repercussions of white supremacy to look at how it has affected people around the globe. I speak for no one except for the millions of African women who were selected by the white commander to the dungeon to be raped, repeatedly, sometimes destined to die in their own blood. I speak for no one except for the millions of Africans who were shackled to the bowels of ships, state ships, who had derived next to their dead uncle, dead mother, dead brother, sister, mother-in-law, journeyed to lands where uncomprehensible anguish awaited them. I speak for no one except for the million captive African women aboard those ships that felt compelled to murder their own beautiful babies into the infants who would never actually have this spiritual nightmare of enslavement. I speak for no one except for the millions of indigenous, for the Americans who were savagely brutalized, tortured, raped, secretly given smallpox, blankets, and murdered, simply for opening their hearts and minds to white arms and to white strangers to come up along for a journey. We think that some of these claims that exist within this activity that talk about fairness, objectivity, predictability, are always the marginalized, oppressed, and silenced. Our voice is Delgado in 92. We have cleverly built the very term appropriate state of context, the very term fair. That's the stronger party able to have his or her way, see him or herself as principal at the same time. The objective approach is not merely a better or more fair, rather reflects the accepted because it embodies the system of a stronger party, essentially go found itself in a position to dictate what permission was actually meant. Allowing ourselves to be drawn on the reflective and predictable arguments about fairness points us away from what really counts, how the way the stronger party has managed to inscribe their views into an interest, into an external culture. This activity has become one of those strong views of white supremacy that shake the microcosm that favors the white performance as debate, as per the awards assembly. We must actually engage in a framework that addresses the claims that we all talk about to root no harms. This is Mills in 97. What is needed is a global theoretical framework, situation, discussion of race and vibration, and thereby challenging the assumption that white political philosophy, in other words, recognition that racism and global white supremacy is a system is itself a political system. David and I believe the debate should be about the liberation of the oppression of changing the conditions of this white supremacist activity. Our framework is the best engaging, consistent practice of advocacy advances the liberation of the oppressed. Laurie Neal, former philosopher of the Black Arts Movement in the 68, writes that the Western white aesthetic is running short. It's impossible to construct anything meaningful within this decaying structure. We advocate a cultural revolution, art and ideas, and the cultural values inherent in the Western history must either be radicalized or destroyed. We find that radicalization is impossible. In fact, what is needed is a whole new system of ideas. Thus, our advocacy is that the debate community should embrace a revolutionary aesthetics in order to destroy the dominant Western white aesthetics. Because our social location as black men allows us to only speak from that type of social location without intruding on the actual identity of others, we think that we engage in the black aesthetic as a way to actually address the cons that we talk about. We think that our revolutionary aesthetics are able to allow people to self-determine their own methods of how they construct their identity, but we feel for us as black males we must engage in the black aesthetic. Laurie Neal further said that the motive behind the black aesthetic is destruction of the white thing, destruction of white ideas and white ways of looking at the world. The new aesthetic is basically predicated on ethics, which asks the question whose vision of the world is finally more meaningful, ours or white oppressors. What is true? Or precisely whose truth shall be actually expressed? That of the oppressed or the oppressor. We furthermore think that debate will actually become a space where we make liberation and justice towards the methods that we engage in. The resolutions will not be solely focused on the United States federal government action and create, and we as academics will have agency to change the conditions of society by actually advocating those type of actions. People of color will not feel the psychic trauma of the white gaze that we always feel in this activity, especially those who actually engage in alternative style debate. When we walk down the halls, we feel that we are the ones that are otherwise, the ones that feel excluded because of the fact that we don't engage in traditional practices like y'all do. We furthermore think that we will perceive objective standards will not be the same criteria how we adjudicate grounds. The education produced here will not solely relate to the self, and it will be about how one lives and how one behaves and how one can endorse a plan of action to change the present conditions of society as a prerequisite to changing this activity. Picking debate judges wouldn't be so hard because there wouldn't be a strong white male judging bias in this activity that only favors the white performance. Thus, these will be some of the introductory visions of the debate instead of propping up the appearance agendas and role-playing the oppressor that would be exported to the larger society. This is William Spanos and Joe Miller's book, The Cross. He says, I'm very much aware that Eric and Neil caused now saturated the Bush administration. Judges, Pentagon planners, State Department officials learned that disinterested argument skills in high school and college debate societies and equality have become masters that dishonor the just cause of the oppressed. This kind of leadership will reproduce itself along with the invisible oppression that perpetuates as long as training on the debate protocols which emerges remains intact. A revolution in debate must actually occur. We also believe that white supremacy is the root of all war and eco-crisis. This is wise to again in 2006. It is American form of white supremacy still at its predecessor, rooted in the dichotomization of people into good and bad, responsible and irresponsible, which leads to the nation such as the U.S. to believe that itself is entitled to the resources of Earth and only and that oil reserves beneath the sands of Iraq or coal deposits in the West Virginia mountainside. The entitlement mentality proceeds to drive the profit and helps place in the proper context. The same mentality then contributes to the world's ecological predicament, including global climate change, soil and wet and erosion, polluted drinking water, and air. They're all related to health effects of all these issues. We furthermore think that we must engage a revolutionary aesthetic in order to embrace a way to break down some of the exclusionary practices that exist within this activity, and all of you as a community have a responsibility in dealing with that.
And that's a regular process.
What's the white aesthetic?
The white aesthetic is a Eurocentric way of looking at the world. It's not viewing the lens of oppression through the eyes of the oppressed. It's just seeing it in this mechanistic way of, like, you know, just seeing oppression.
What's the black revolution? What's the black revolutionary aesthetic?
The revolutionary aesthetic.
Like just one of your cards, like
the revolutionary aesthetic is one that we say we're not going to look at the world from that way. We're going to look at it from the eyes of the oppressed. And we're saying that us as black people, we have to engage in a black aesthetic because that is one that is unique to our
social. The revolutionary aesthetic is one that is anti-white aesthetic. So
yes.
Okay. Okay. What is white performance in debate?
White performance in debate is like listening to soul reliance on the use of traditional authors. It's also living in the fiat fantasy world. Our impacts are only accessible through that.
Objective disconnected narrative.
Yeah, objective disconnected narratives which say that, you know, we shouldn't be having a personal connection to our arguments and that we shouldn't have personal conviction.
I can't have a personal connection if I endorse the United States federal government.
Hey, I'm just talking about your buddies in this community that say we shouldn't have when they want framework arguments against us, saying that we must have a topical plan tags. I'm not. It's nothing against you.
I'll give you a heads up. We're not going to read that argument.
Okay, that's fine.
Here.
That's fine. That's still fine. see. We're not going to change it just because we go against you. We don't know what you're going to say.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. Is speed part of a technocratic system?
I mean, it could be. We don't criticize that.
Okay. Then what's the difference between speed, which seems to try to fit a lot of arguments into a certain amount of time, focus on types of arguments different than like a traditional author?
It isn't really speed, it's spread, right? And we're not attempting to like put a whole bunch of arguments in the debate so you can't answer them. It's an attempt to make sure we make the argument as full and as deep as we possibly can. It's not a question of like...
Why can't traditional authors be trying to make an argument as deep and full as possible?
We're saying solely relying on them is a bad epistemological practice because we only get the view of academia instead of not who we are or from people that exist within other realms like hip-hop or poetry.
Okay, so we need to read hip-hop or poetry?
You didn't say you had to. If you want to, you can, but it'd probably be an argument around.
Okay, that's fine. So just to be clear though, what you're criticizing is just debate in general, sort of how it's exclusive, people should speak from their social location?
I mean, that as well as white supremacy and
okay.
Yeah. Going to procedures that exclusionary.
I'm going to start with some thank yous. The first are kind of administrative. First to Sandra Drake, who's secretary at the School of Communications at Kansas, and without her, we probably wouldn't be here because she does all of Harris's paperwork. As well as Dr. Parson and Dr. Rowland, who are also administrators at the School of Communications at Kansas, who are heavily supportive of debate. I'd like to thank the CEDA Executive Committee for hosting the tournament, as well as Jeff Jarman for hosting the tournament, as well as all of you for judging the debate. I'd like to thank our opponents for having this debate, my parents for supporting me during some decisions that I've made. Those of you laughing, huh? I want to thank Wichita State for both hosting the tournament, and specifically Jeff Jarman, who coached me for 2 years, as well as Matt Coleman, who I debated with for 2 years, and who really got me hooked on debate when we went to high school together. I want to thank the entire KU debate team. I won't name names because there's too many of them. I do want to thank all of our coaches for supporting us through both the work that they do and their emotional support. So Harris, Lindsay, Jan, Sarah, Ben, Mick, Phil, thank you. And lastly, I want to thank Nate, who without him I wouldn't be here right now, and I certainly wouldn't have the motivation to he not beat me on that 5-0 decision in the doubles of the NDT last year. With that, the order will be one off in case. Is everybody good? All right.
First off, the criticism casts action classifying a series of different groups under the banner of the press, why bunch small lump them together, and to one make homogenous whole things that things submitted to system of control. This race their specific place focusing on combination sedition, showing that the particular movement becomes a system of domination. Not all those who are minorities in debate experience oppression. Not all of those who experience oppression experience it in the same way. Don't allow the affirmatives to juxtapose this discussion with images of suffering and oppression despite their claims to universality and liberation. It's true that no one ever sees control, and the voting for the affirmatives project only gives them carte blanche to become the voices for all minorities in debate, allowing them to gain control of the activity as well as movements to change it. This is a war in 99. Liberation theology assumes this common experience of oppression is sufficient to create desire for criminal coalitions as minorities here too. This movement indiscriminately classifies our minorities as a single category of people seeking liberation. Such a classification is an easy way to eliminate specific groups and a clever way to turn aside efforts of dissenting groups to get the particular calls for the person. A minority group had not invaded the liberal establishment. Most certainly would not have created the immediate response as one of horrified refusal to believe that their community have a racial or sexual minority that does not consider itself to be under oppression. Those who reject that concept of oppression merely are so completely the victims of oppression that they do not even recognize the circular logic closes immediately upon them making the victims. Indeed, liberation theology is simply the latest gimmick to keep minority groups circling the wagons with the hope they can eliminate oppression. No winner, no matter how sincere one surrenders his power over others, he may devise clever ways to appear to share the power, but he always keeps a couple of bases up his sleeves in case things get out of control. Immediate suffering is placed in juxtaposition with abstract metaphysical conceptions of the world, because we can see immediate suffering, we feel inclined to change conditions quickly to relieve tensions, never coming to an understanding about how the basic attitude towards life and its derivative attitudes towards minority groups continues to dominate the goals and activities that appear designed to create reform. They'll make an argument that they allow minorities into debate, but once into debate, how are those minorities treated? The claim that the affirmative is a new banner for liberation of all oppressed groups today. Even if they increase minority participation, those minorities can never be anything but shadows of Towson debating towards the goals that they have set forth. Those minorities who have no interest in their project or have interest in different projects will be labeled Uncle Tom or idiots, unable to focus on the true issues that confront everyone alike. In this light, we should be honest about what dominates the minds of almost everyone in the activity: winning rounds. The competitive driver is what propels the debate community, what is ultimately united as a social group. A strategy that ignores this competitive drive, that sees it only as a tool for achieving transformation rather than a part of the greater problem can never be anything other than an accommodational strategy. Those who oppose their strategy won't question their racism, won't self-reflect, but instead just treat their argument as a roadblock on their path to winning the tournament. Instead, what we need is openness and love. We need to reorient ourselves towards an ethics that refuses to draw lines and stand around identity and have complete love and acceptance. By constituting the other as a neighbor, we can create an ethical totality where we create an environment that is hospitable to oppressed people. This is Lominsky in form. We cannot content ourselves with applying existing norms or rules, but must make an absolute risk in every single instance. If it were being made for the first time, hospitality focused on what is most urgent today, the most proper for the articulation of political ethics of the conflict resolution. I have to welcome the other, whoever the other is, on unconditional. I have to open my doors, my house, my home, my state, and myself. Yes, unconditional hospitality is frightening and transgressive, but it takes us beyond the Judeo-Christian understanding of hospitality. If we decide that everyone will be able to enter my space, and there is a chance that the worst may happen, yes, but we must be open to the best of the worst. In other words, the human and or hospitality will no longer be unconditional. It is an opening without the horizon of expectation where peace can be found beyond the confines of the conflict. And the next argument is that our methodology of love leads to social transformation is sustainable. In 2000, landmarks in theory transfigure what the foundational underclay makes very existence possible. What surfaces is the forgotten, exposes an apparatus for global formations. This apparatus is a theory and method which comes through grammar and supremacy and transforms the methodology of emancipation. That apparatus is love. Case. Here's the answers to your white supremacy is the root cause argument. This is the argument that white supremacy is the root cause of all oppression should be disqualified as non-possible claims. It functions like the chicken and the egg argument. All oppressions demonstrated to be in some way similar or related to white supremacy and thus asserted to be caused by white supremacy. The Matthew Shepard example is instructive. Homophobic violence brutally took his life. To argue that this homophobia has some historical, ontological, epistemological root in white supremacy is to merely assert that because, like white supremacy, homophobia is an illogical bigotry that must be the cause. But we can simply argue that homophobia is caused by a psychological disconnect from the ego and early childhood trauma, biology, fear of the other, captain's alienation, religious sexual alienation, self-loathing, and any number of things. The truth is that such assertions are unproductive. Not possible arguments should be rejected for the following reasons. The ace of point is there's no way to test for validity. If white supremacy is the root cause, there should be a way to demonstrate the truth is by creating a scenario in which the argument could be disproved. Excessive claim versus that scenario. Base of point, they obfuscate other causes of oppression. If, for example, we incorrectly attribute the cause of racism to religious indoctrination, we fail to identify the necessary locations to challenge racism. Likewise, if we pretend that racism causes homophobia, we never actually address one of society's most prevalent and accepted bigotry. The sub-point is that these claims absolve individuals' responsibility for their prejudice. The deep-seated psychological desire is the cause of violence, then individuals cannot be responsible for their violent actions. Likewise, if institutions of white supremacy are responsible for sexism, then people can assume that discrimination against women is a struggle that's fought by challenging racist norms and never interrogate the practices of themselves or the institutions that must be sexist. The rhetoric of root causality is destructive. Claims that there is a single core cause of violence are based on reductionist models of thought that ignore the complexity of the nature of violence and prevent us from finding effective solutions. To believe in root causes removes the individual responsibility that we have to choose to prevent acts of violence such as in the form. Speaking of root causes, social problems are borrowing ideas from determinism. Root cause arguments are obscure rather than light. Such thinking rules out the idea of human consciousness and moral responsibility. But the belief in root causes relieves us of the responsibility for our actions, also weakens the belief in the existence of free will. Nothing will destroy golden age of innovation faster than a paralysis of the will. If we doubt we have a will because of a belief in the myth of the root causes, that the will becomes either paralyzed or undisciplined. Draw line. The defense of an aesthetic rights opposition to dominant culture empirically diminishes the potential of the aesthetic and reifies hierarchical divisions as SWAT in Spasm 1. The black aesthetic movement ultimately constrained black intellectual freedom. Black artists never consider Western artistic traditions to be appropriate for black American artists and rejecting West cut themselves off from the richest cultural resources. The historical stigmatization of black American identity stimulated black responses simply inverted these invaluable judgments. Good Africa, bad Europe. They elevated the status of their African lineage and at the same time they integrated the Euro-American heritage. This attempted reversal of the hegemonic white racial hierarchy was understandable, but the shortcomings of the black aesthetic lay in its distortions of black cultural and physiological complexity. The United States was a dynamic, logical culture. The black aesthetic advocates refused to recognize this cross-racial fertilization in favor of mythical claims for a racially circumscribed, distinct black American cultural sensibility. The affirmative explicitly defines the black aesthetic as that which is not white, rather than assessing concept of independent meaning. The black aesthetic can make blackness and our understanding of it dependent upon whiteness. The bipolar dialectic has several implications. One, it constrains ontological possibilities by situating racial categories as dialectic. Two, it turns the case by giving credence to white superiority and black inferiority. Three, it takes out their solvency. A black aesthetic cannot be freeing when blackness is seen as an expression of deficiency. This is Walter's associate professor of African diaspora at Emerson College in 6. When the relationship between non-white and white is considered in dynamic opposition, ontological possibilities available to those characters is severely limited. The dichotomy is constituted of color categories that appear to be opposite, generally positioned as other versus white. Implicit in this bipolar dialectic is the assumption of black inferiority and white superiority. Native is black to find opposition to whiteness. The resulting codependence creates categories of identification that give credence to the hierarchy of white superiority and black inferiority. Identities within each must respond to the assumptions endemic to such hierarchy, and acknowledgement of these assumptions, even to the contrary, has the effect of reinforcing them. This is best articulated by Glissant, who assures us one cannot transcend consciousness. What is nothing nothing but the expression of deficiency of the of experience inadequate. Further defining fascist opposition to white is just a outbreak of white supremacy. There are two reasons. One is oppositional definitions allow whites to identify as the rightful center of power, and two, black identity is constantly deferred. Thus, no stable, productive identity can be formed that's determined fact. Blackness defines itself in opposition to white, other that in turn defines itself against black others. The often seems to feel nobody recognizes white, while white is when non-white people are also represented as a result. Racial identity depends on a perpetual deferral and relate to others in an effort to ground itself to self. This was formed that ensures that the racial representation present will continually be haunted by the eruption of the past that the results in unstable temporal identity. Draw another one. Revolution is a violent metaphor that's not appropriate for actions that describe it. This agrees 85. Consider the word revolution with its two basic meanings. The first comes from a verb to revolve, meaning to rotate around a single point. The second refers to a violent overthrow of a regime. The word revolution implies a suddenness of change, carrying with it the connotation of violence. Terms of violence may not be appropriate to describe their activity. As well, also Towson's forms of revolutionary attacks, liberals, and collapses movements. While they're trying to make sure that there are no more hollow roads from the activity, the real brunt of their anger is taken on people who would otherwise stand in solidarity with it. This is the danger of using terms like revolution. This is Time magazine. Reckless invocations of revolution and violence will defeat the very force that most often protest society. The enemy is not the conservative reaction, but the liberal. Bonds have been repeatedly shouted down in class. His cars have been smeared with hate. A bomb was placed outside his office. An SDS student told him why. You are a perfect symbol. You are white. You have a doctorate of philosophy degree. You speak your mind in public. Your arguments are always rational and organized, but most of all, you are a liberal. Independently. Their movement by example and persuasion will never succeed. It only serves a small population with long-standing potential for broad movement and changes for topless and one. These trends are obvious among many activists involved in affinity groups. This description covers all those who are involved in activities to rather than the aim to build a new anti-systemic movement with a clear vision about a future strategy to reach it. Assailing organizations was rejecting the need for building a political movement and relying instead on bringing social change by example. Such activities not only are usually not related to radical anti-systemic politics in the sense of promoting an alternative society, but are often so politically harmless that the political elites frequently use them for their own ends. Such sort of activities are utterly ineffective in bringing about change. This course does not have any chance of success. The projects suggested by the strategy may be too easily absorbed into the existing power structure. Systemic social change can never be achieved outside the main political arena. The elimination of the present power structures can neither be achieved by setting an example nor through education and persuasion.
What is your framework?
Our framework argument is the alternative argument, I believe.
It's the alternative that
We endorse an ethic of love and openness.
Okay, so how does that change the debate community?
How does the ethic of love and Well, similar to the way that endorsing a revolutionary aesthetic would.
I'm asking how
Clearly the round itself is not overly important by itself, but the transition that it makes outside of the round, how it informs people in the debate, and what sorts of practical strategies they're given by this discussion.
So how long have you been advocating this method, this ethic of love?
This round.
This round? Yeah. So how sincere are we sure that you are about this ethic of love?
You can be entirely sincere.
Really? How?
Sure, we're entirely sincere.
So you're going to advocate this at the NDC?
Probably not.
Well, okay, so why should we believe you in this round? I mean, like, if you really want this ethic of love, why don't you want it consistently in every round?
I don't understand why
that you're negative.
We can't advocate that outside of debate.
Because that's the type of disconnectedness that we talk about. But at the same time,
If we don't think about it, talk about it, or reflexive about these sorts of things,
okay, explain to me the methodology of this love and openness. Like specifically, what are the specific things that you're asking the community to endorse through this ethic? So the particular methodology.
To everybody and love everybody.
So just love everybody.
Be open to everyone and love everyone.
Okay, so that doesn't take any racial categories into mind, no sexual categories.
It doesn't pretend, though, that people don't assume racial categories.
Okay, so it's like a colorblind, asexual type of thing you're talking about?
I think you're trying to
I'm asking you about your methodology.
I understand. And I think you're getting towards sort of a, we're colorblind, the world's really not colorblind. And I think that's characterizing the alternative the wrong way. We recognize a lot of times that people do impose certain stereotypes on other people, and that is imposed on you. But we're saying that in a practical politics, to fight that sort of oppression, we should be open to everybody.
And you're just going to do that in this round?
Maybe.
Okay. All right, so your arguments, we said it's a black-white dichotomy, right? As you said, that we imposed.
Well, we made an argument as to how the black...
I'm just asking questions. Do you have a black-white dichotomy argument?
Well, yes.
Okay. All right, so...
Not that, like, that dichotomy doesn't exist.
I understand your argument. I was just making sure what it was. So, this black arts movement stuff, now, how are we defending the black arts movement?
Our evidence is specific to the black aesthetic.
No,
the black
it says in the long run, the black arts movement increased black artists.
The black arts movement used the black
You just
aesthetic.
highlight others, the black aesthetic and the black arts movement.
The first part of that, the very first line of that evidence says that the black arts movement used the black aesthetic.
That's what your evidence says as well. It arose from arts movements that occurred in.
Okay, but do we have to advocate the black arts movement? The entirety of all
You advocate the black aesthetic.
Do we have to advocate the whole black arts movement?
It's what you said you endorsed as your instance of a revolutionary study.
Me going insane trying to explain my pain on paper. This is my repentance, this soul's application to the Savior. And they say, don't call us, we'll call you. And this is my idle time until the Lord asks for me. This is my attempt at blasphemy. This is my cleaning, my vaccination, my pleading, my explanation for the short of my aspirations and goals. This is my pain on paper.
This is my pain on paper. This is poetry. Now this is spoken word. Spoken through open source, spoken through broken vocal cords. This is the prequel to the sequel. The anger of the unequal. This is the bleach to a white tee. This is the peace sign to a t-shirt that says kill white tee. This is the cure to jungle fever. This is the video game that made the White House Resident Evil. This is my paper.
That was Archie the Messenger and Lyrical the Lyricist talking about the ways in which white supremacy affects their life, talks about the psychological damage that happens as a result of white supremacy, their inability to have access to the means of power to have a sustainable living condition. Our argument is that because white supremacy, as we exist right now, in a society that is dominated by European and American colonial powers, we have to recognize the centrality in which white supremacy affects our moment in time right now. Their arguments about this kind of critique of difference, they don't recognize the kind of intricacies of the ways in which our advocacy functions. We don't claim that all black people are oppressed as individuals. Our argument is that the institutions that create the type of oppression that exists cause the type of psychological damage as well as being less able to access the means of power that Archie the Messenger talks about. Also, the point where we don't say that people are absolutely oppressed. As a black man, I have male privilege, as well as the fact that as a result of white supremacy, I suffer as a result of white supremacy in that regard. So individuals have different ways in which they experience oppression. And our argument is we don't make these kind of universalized claims to speak for all black people. We recognize in a white supremacist society that privileges white bodies and has the aesthetic norm that Mill's evidence about, that the one he talks specifically about is one that actually affects the way in which people of color, particularly black people, are affected in this activity. And all of their evidence on this assumes black liberation theology, which isn't really rooted in exactly what it is that we're talking about. Also, they make arguments about how we have to not label people, we have to unite. But our argument is that people not wanting to engage and talk about the ways in which their white privilege affects the ways in which this institution works is a protection of privilege and is problematic practice, because what we have to do is engage and allowing people to not be comfortable all the time, because it's this uncomfortability that allows the reflexivity necessary to be able to reflect about the practices that cause the type of oppression that we've been talking about. On this openness and love alternative, we solve the permutation. We can engage in this openness and love. Devin and I don't hate every individual debater in this room, hate no debater in this activity. Our argument is that we have to challenge the individuals in this activity because we have a responsibility to do so as intellectuals who participate in this activity. Also, the disadvantages to their alternative is that it engages us in this kind of colorblind mentality. It doesn't talk about the centrality of white supremacy, which means that we perpetuate the invisibility of white supremacy, which will take away the analytical tools necessary to transform the very conditions that cause the type of oppression that we talk about. Also, the point where there's no specific methodology for how love and openness is actually going to transform the conditions to create an alternative pedagogy that allows activity to not pervade the kind of disinterested argumentative skills that the Spanos evidence is talking about that informs the neoconservative agenda, means that they don't have a way to access the ability of being able to change the methodology that exists in this activity. Also, this kind of utopian idea also links into the white aesthetic, to this kind of objective disconnected narrative where people speak about these things without understanding the ways in which their own political agency relates to the actual politics that we're talking about, and this becomes extremely problematic. As a result, the revolutionary aesthetics allows the best way to engage in this openness, this kind of openness and love that they talk about, because it allows individuals to self-determine the way in which their aesthetics they access their aesthetics in this activity as a way to challenge the dominant white Western aesthetic that exists in this activity. And nothing about the alternative challenges the dominant white Western aesthetic. In fact, it keeps it intact. And as a result, individuals are able to self-determine the way in which they engage in this activity, which is the ultimate form of love in this activity. Also, because our advocacy is who engages in a consistent practice in advocacy to advance the liberation of the oppressed, because they made it very clear they probably won't on this argument again. This means that their methodology is most likely to not work as a result of them not consistently advancing this advocacy as a means to challenge these particular forms of domination. Alright, these case arguments. Alright, so they make arguments about how white supremacy isn't the root cause, and that those things are problematic and obscures other root causes. Our argument, we have to look at it, like I talked about this before, we kind of have to look at this in the way in which the moment we exist in right now. We're not saying that, all the things that happen in the world are happening particularly as a result of white supremacy, in as much as that the historical moment that we're in right now is one that's been governed by white supremacy, that it is capitalism that has maintained the ability of white supremacy to maintain itself. It is white imperialism that has been able to subjugate the entire world. And our argument is that any world such as this, as the Mills evidence suggests, that we have to recognize the centrality of white supremacy and challenging these particular forms of domination. As a result, then when they make these arguments about it's like a chicken and an egg question, it's rather a matter of who historically and politically has the best understanding of the politics that exists right now. We have a superior one as a result of the Mills evidence that we talk about. Also, they also make these arguments about how we reify binary. They make this argument about how we reify binaries. Look, our argument, first of all, is the revolutionary aesthetic solves this fact. At the point where individuals are able to self-determine the ways in which they engage and the type of revolutionary aesthetics that we talk about, then they're able to self-determine the ways in which we can change those conditions in our society. They make arguments about how we flip power binaries by demonizing white folks and saying all Europe bad and Africa good. Look, our argument is that, first of all, black folks in this society don't have the ability to flip binaries. We don't have the political or social power to be able to do that in this society. Also, at the point where the revolutionary aesthetic solves this back by allowing individuals to engage in a revolutionary aesthetic that can challenge these particular forms of domination. They make these arguments about how there's no stable identities, about these stable identities, and we always defer ourselves to the type of identities that have been discussed and identified for us. Whiteness has created the ways in which society sees us. It is a phenomenon that has created the way in which we understand ourselves. In our argument is at the point where whiteness and white supremacy through the Mills evidence that talks about it requires a kind of global theoretical understanding or centering of white supremacy in the way we understand politics. But we have to recognize that within whiteness that we're identified as black folks and therefore have to use that in order to understand our position in society. If not, then we're ignoring a very fundamental aspect of the way in which the politics in our society work and therefore disarms our ability to challenge forms of domination. So they make this argument about how revolutionary is a very violent metaphor. First of all, this speaks to the very argument that we've been talking about all along in terms of people being uncomfortable with the type of arguments that we're making. Look, this revolutionary, first of all, the way in which we appropriate the term revolutionary is one that advances the challenge towards domination in the society, that wants to embrace a way in which we can actually use this activity as a means to avoid having to resort to violent means to cause a revolution. We want to use this space as a means to challenge the forms of domination. And at the point where most of their evidence is linked to the black arts movement, the way in which they characterize the black arts movement is problematic because it operates within the space that wants to control the ways in which the black arts movement is perceived. And we're not defending the entirety of the black arts movement, but rather the idea that Devin and I, as black people in the United States, have a unique perspective, and they have to embrace that aesthetic in order to transform the conditions that exist, particularly in our society. Also, those pieces of evidence and the kind of claim that we shouldn't talk about the ways in which our identity affects us is problematic. That's Towson 1990. The postmodern critique of identity, though relevant for renewed black liberation struggles, often posed in ways that are problematic. Even presents a policy of white supremacy that seeks to prevent the formation of a radical black subjectivity. We cannot carefully dismiss concern with identity politics and exploring the radical potential of postmodernism as it relates to racial difference and racial domination. We need to consider the implication of a particular identity for oppressed groups. So it basically talks about how those kinds of critiques of identity and the uses of identity takes away from our ability to actually transform the conditions that exist in our society. Also, and this kind of relates more to the permutation argument and the ethic of love. That D'Angelo in 2006 says, at the same time that whites are taught to see their interests as distinctive and universal, they also are taught to value individuals who themselves as individuals rather as a part of a racially socialized group. Individuals of race history hides the ways in which wealth has been distributed cumulatively over generations that benefit whites today. Also, it also says that whites invoke the seemingly contradicting discourse, universalism and individualism as needed. Both this is work to deny the significance of racial position. When racial comfort arises, whites typically respond to something is wrong and blame the person in the event that triggered that discomfort. White insistence on racial comfort guarantees racism will not be faced except in the most superficial ways. And also, the Mills evidence to talk specifically about the inverted epistemology, focusing on the centrality of white supremacy that allows the continuation of white supremacy because we have an epistemology that doesn't recognize the very specific things about the ways white supremacy affects our society, which takes away the tools from us to transform.
How do you know that white supremacy is the root of all the problems amongst the debate community?
Yeah, because it comes, I mean, this society is one that was developed off of white supremacy. The United States to be able to maintain the type of power that exists right now.
So because the United States was developed in white supremacy, that means that the debate community is developed in?
The fact that we use wise evidence that you never answered that talks about why this activity is perceived as white.
So why?
Our argument is that this debate community isn't divorced from the United States. Like, it's an institution that exists within America. It's an institution that arises out of the roots of white supremacy.
So anything that exists in America is based in white supremacy?
Unless there's an intentional effort to challenge and to fight against white supremacy.
Okay, so the only things that exist outside of white supremacy are those things that challenge it?
Those things that seek to resist white supremacy are those things that take it into consideration and challenging it, not challenging it.
So the alternative to our argument takes that into consideration and tries to challenge it. I'm curious then how it's a product of white supremacy.
What's a product of white supremacy?
You made an argument that our alternative is a product of the white aesthetic. I'm curious how it is, since it attempts to challenge the white aesthetic.
Because it doesn't take into consideration, like, nothing about it talks about the ways in which it challenges white supremacy. It talks about embracing an ethic of love and this openness, but it doesn't talk about the ways in which it specifically has a methodology for challenging white supremacy.
What about embracing love and openness doesn't challenge white supremacy?
You tell me what about it does. Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, what about it?
Is the white aesthetic open or loving?
No.
Okay.
I'm curious, you made a bunch of arguments as to how we don't have any solvency for our methodology. How does your methodology solve and eliminate white supremacy?
Because we talk about the ways in which the discussions we have in this activity are the ones that oftentimes are taken outside of this activity, as per the Spano 7. So our argument is that the engagement...
Is there an endpoint to those discussions, or...?
No, we think they need to continue all the way through until we
What about when white supremacy is eliminated from the debate community?
Well, we'll have that conversation when it's eliminated.
Right.
That seems like an important question for the solvency to your methodology. What happens when white supremacy is gone?
Are you saying that that would be a reason to maintain white supremacy? I mean, I don't understand.
No, it's a question as to how your methodology solves, man.
We have not gotten to that point yet to speak on that. On top of that, your actual advocacy doesn't even solve that in the first place. You don't even talk about oppression or white supremacy in itself. You just say ethic of love, which never gives us no detail of how we're going to deal with oppression in itself. It glosses over talking about issues of race and all those type of things. You never give us any specific methodology except for saying we're going to embrace love.
Okay, like, it assumes that white supremacy is about hate.
I got one more question real quick. Assuming that it would probably be good to increase the amount of minority participation in debate, how does your app methodology do that? How does embracing a revolutionary aesthetic do that?
Our argument is that it allows individuals from various social locations to embrace an aesthetic that can challenge the epistemologies that oftentimes African Americans don't want to
But our argument isn't also participation. So
yeah, like the off-case position will be a lot of, like, the alternative solvency arguments, as well as the permutation answers, and then indicts of our alternative sort of arguments. And then on the case, it'll be just extending the arguments there as well as responses. Yeah.
Sorry. No, he doesn't want to. Is that it?
Okay. Sarah so kindly pointed out. You probably thank a couple people first. First, I want to thank my parents. I know they're not here, but they were here a little bit earlier, gave us a lot of support, and it's really nice that they came down to watch us. I want to thank the Roos, Scott Harris, for everything he does for us, and then even the things he doesn't, like always, give us money, get us to tournaments in the right place. Go to Kansas City instead of Cincinnati. I want to thank the rest of our coaches, Sarah, Phil, Lindsay, Jan, Nick, Ben. I think that's everybody. I also want to thank Sandra, Dr. Parsons, and Dr. Rowland for all the support they give us, and all the publicity that they've given us throughout this year. I want to thank Towson for being here, and the debate that we're having, and of course I want to thank Stone. Not only for an NDT victory last year, but just because all the help he's given me, the massive amount of work that he does, really carries me a lot of the time. And also not just because he's a lot bigger.
First argument on the op cases I want to extend is our liberation argument. The Delory evidence indicates that the way their politics of liberation to the oppressed functions, serves to whitewash the whole system of domination. It assumes that we can speak for everyone carte blanche in the same way as if we can speak for all oppressions and liberate all of them from a singular social location. The idea that we can liberate people from a single category of oppression is exactly what we are criticizing. The immediate response is that we all become victims of oppression, that we circle our wagons. But really, who cares? It's not like a ballot at the end of the round is going to change the power structures of the debate. It's an illusory concept that we are all going to be liberated because you voted for them at the end of this debate. The idea of a politics of liberation that is so focused exclusively and posits itself so exclusively, or winning and losing, and just getting a seat at championship is exactly what we're criticizing, pretending that victory is the end. This evidence indicates that it treats everything as shadows. All of your competition becomes Uncle Tom's. If you do not do it the way that they do, then it is not the most effective way to go about breaking down the power structures of debate. Last year I read a Women in Debate app. Our argument was extremely similar. Its aim was equality and freedom. And we said that white sexual privilege lay at the center of oppression, and one should vote for us to be able to start a revolution in the debate community. We debated others who had issues with oppression, bigotry, and pain. But we had to tell them that their life, their social location, their pain was not good enough. It was not our social location. It was not the most effective way to break down the white heteronormative supremacy that dominated everyone. We wanted to be open, but our emphasis was so strongly on our particular explanation of liberation that it actually hurt others. It split us from those who should have been our friends. This is a criticism of your method. It's not the round, the ballot, but what your advocacy does to the community and how you attempt to be revolutionary. You do speak for others. You speak for their history. You say that you speak for the captive African women, and this is the pinnacle of their liberation. This debate round, this ballot, this is the history of indigenous Americans. As if their liberation is yours. They can determine their identity as long as it's not white and not opposed to Towson. You can speak from your social location, but don't pretend that it's neutral. We also have a presumption link that ties with this Delory evidence. You in the 1AC criticize traditional debate as a way that is impossible to resist the system of traditional white supremacy. I'm assimilated. I'm not reflexive. I'm not going to be. I always accept the fear of the debate community, that it's always in a state of crisis with Towson's kinds of arguments. I'm a productive white male that simply goes fast and reads fiat because I just want to talk about illusory concepts and uphold white privilege. This is actually a part of their 1AC. How the hell do you know that I'm not reflexive, not concerned awfully with racism or oppression in debate? You even read an argument that we try to become like you. So we're totally screwed either way. Either we help you and we become commodifying part of your movement. I'm concerned with racism, but I'm just trying to quietly hold you back with bigotry and keep you down. But if I'm opposed to this, then I'm a racist and the bigot. How the hell are you open to others, and where is the love at? It's in our alternative. They say that the alternative is not going to be pedagogical. Does not have a way to break down the systems of oppression that occur in the debate round. But how do you? I think this is a pretty effective cross-examination question. We're not saying that increasing minority participation in the debate round should be the end-all, be-all, but there is no connection between the methodology of a revolutionary aesthetic and actualizing the types of politics that you so hope for. How do you increase female judges on panels? How do you increase black debaters? What, a ballot at the end of the round? It's a question of the method that we are using in the debate round. If we win arguments why their method is inappropriate, then it is a reason to vote negative. We are establishing a practical politics that could possibly stem from this debate round. There are a ton of people here. There are people that are so interested in Towson's argument because they bring up so many important issues. But this is not a question of the debate round itself. It is not a question of the ballot itself. It's a question of the method and the politics that will be informed by the discussion that actually happens in this round. They make an argument about comfort, but you are comfortable with your argument and with people that vote for you, people that are comfortable with endorsing a revolutionary aesthetic. This is the Delorious evidence and the Luzinski evidence from 1AC. We assume certain rules and norms inevitably. Don't pretend as if you don't establish borders, fences of who's allowed into your revolutionary aesthetic, who is allowed in. In fact, you establish it as a negation in the first place. It is anti-white. It is an anti-white aesthetic. I'll make an argument a little bit later about how that ties in. I want to also answer this argument about how we will not run this again. It does not believe that we do not do what we say and that this is not a productive discussion. Just because we won't run it again doesn't mean it could not possibly have the same effect of ensuring an effective political strategy. Also, this probably links to our argument because we're only allowed to discuss this from our social location, only within our round. This is the only thing we can ever talk about. Where's the transformation into practical political action that you have always criticized? And it's not like you've always done this either, which probably probably shows the nebulousness of this argument. When you're voting for the negative, what does this constitute? What does our team constitute? They have already decided who and what we are, who Stone and I are. Remember that voting affirmative is not only a positive endorsement, but a negative rejection. And it is a rejection of a team that you've already claimed to know. This is not a team, a squad that oppose your movement. It's not a team of men. It is a team of men and women, minorities and whites. We do not stick to certain argument styles or choices. We run politics and counterplans. We run projects and criticisms. We are not insulated debaters. My partner last year works at a debate coalition to try to increase women's participation in debate. What is the material benefit of voting negative? Is our community. It is who we are. It is Tuna Snyder, Jeff Jarman, Kelly McDonald, Ben Voth, Sarah Partlow, Jake Thompson, Eric Morris, Matt Gerber, John Fritsch, Tom Goodnight, Carla Lieber, Harry Voss, Charles Miller. He hired Eddie Warren at Louisville, Brent Bossman, Val Reniger, Stacey Sowards, Jeff Dale Hobbs, Robin Rowland, David Magriel, Scott Herndon, Mike Eber, Dan Lingle, Kevin Minch, Beth Skinner, and Chris Barrett. All are associated with KU debate community. This is important. We do have things to say that can probably inform your political movement, and we are the community that we're also trying to change. To the permutation, how is it that you're not inclusive, and how does this apply to your 1AC? You say that you're open, but you footnote the oppression of others. It has to fit within your particular social location. You are the method to be able to take down white supremacy that is so fundamentally oppressive, but your social location is the way to liberate all people in the first place. You say you don't speak for others, then how can you say that you necessarily liberate them? And to separate yourself so avidly from the debates in the community that you that you so wish to engage also applies to you. You find an enemy and oppose them, which is the traditional versus critical debate that I talked about above, and it's footnoted inclusion to emerge from the rubble of the victorious. You win, and we are able to break down all sorts of white liberation. This is not openness, and this is not openness or love at all. They say that theirs is a message of love, but it's revolutionary and confrontational. It's an oppositional aesthetic that's based on an anti-white aesthetic. That there is an act that can cause an opening of all oppression. They have to win. They have to be successful. Look, it's a competitive activity, but this is not our concern. The affirmative ballot is not an endpoint. It establishes an artificial division, believing that we've necessarily done something. It is the enunciation of liberation informed by a particular social location, a certain skin color, a certain place of residence, a certain argument style, judged not by the content of character, but presumption of who the hell we are because of school names and stereotypes on the case page. So in our root cause argument, I don't think he has a very good answer to this argument. We're presuming that we're not saying necessarily that you should speak for social locations, but you make arguments like it's governed by white supremacy, that white imperialism subjugates the whole world. This is the link to our argument, believing that we can solve all of the world's ills by a single act from a particular social location. It obfuscates other forms of oppression, other cases of oppression, pretending that if we solve for racism, we can solve for the dynamic of homophobia or sexism that is so inherent in them. And people assume that they've challenged racism, they challenge sexism or homophobia, but they are insulating themselves from that same sort of criticism. So in our black aesthetic argument, this William evidence is pretty good. You argue about black folks not having social power. This is probably a link to our victims argument. The Deloria evidence indicates that we just assume that we are victims, that we don't have social power, but it does not assume the opportunity for openness that arises. This Williams evidence argues how the black aesthetic itself does actually create a community. Just because you speak from a particular social location doesn't mean you also speak for black people. It indicates that when there was the black arts movement in the ghettos, which is what your 1AC evidence talks about, it created a community. It created a community of blacks and tried to establish a black aesthetic. But how is this not just the same sort of community, maybe on a smaller scale in terms of population? It tries to control the history of others from a particular aesthetic that arises from a particular social location. Senator Walter's evidence, this is the negation argument that I was talking about. It indicates that you are just a dynamic type of opposition, and implicitly, blacks become inferior because you establish them only in opposition to white supremacy. The only way their identity exists at all is because the white one existed in the first place. This reifies the type of construction of white supremacy that you are so ardently criticizing in your 1AC.
Okay. So, you made an argument that in communities that have mostly black folks in it, they have on a smaller scale the ability to inscribe the same type of oppression that white supremacy would, right?
Yeah, all types of communities do that. This evidence,
what ways in which give me an example of a place where an institution...
That's what the Williams evidence is talking about. It's talking about how the black arts movement in the early 1900s developed this idea of a black aesthetic. And it talks about how
give me an example of an instance where a mostly black community was able to exert economic and political and social power over others.
That's what I'm trying to describe to you.
Give me an example.
That's what I'm doing. This Williams evidence says that when the black aesthetic arose from the black arts movement, it thought that it was able to speak
poor community because they were all in opposition to the white aesthetic. And it assumes
okay, so
it exerts power within that community.
Yeah, so give me an example of where that has happened. Like, I'm from Baltimore City. It's a mostly black city. I can't think of an instance where where black people have the economic, political, and social power to dominate white folks economically and politically. Give me an example for that happening.
That's not what the argument is saying. We're not saying that you're dominating white people or like you're oppressing me and stone or anything like that. But it says that the black aesthetic itself basically pretended like it was this objective aesthetic that was empowering for everybody involved and closed itself off to criticism.
When did we assume we were
the black aesthetic excludes? I mean, we talk at length in both of our speeches about increasing subjectivity of individuals. Like, how at all are we saying that the black aesthetic?
I know, and you can't pretend that the communities and aesthetics you establish automatically can get rid of all borders that are inherent in these types of
When did we ever say we get rid of all the borders?
Yeah, I understand. Okay, let me ask you another question. Let's talk about this ethic of
open for all subjects.
So I've been trying to figure out what exactly is it about. Like, what are you doing to enact this methodology of love and openness?
We think that the same way that you endorse the revolution.
No, I'm asking you what you're doing. I understand what we're doing. What are you doing specifically?
We are endorsing an aesthetic and ethic of love and openness, thinking that can inform politics beyond this round.
Explain this aesthetic and how
it should be open to all people.
How does it work? Like, we still don't get it. How does it
work?
Open
to everyone. We love
it. Okay, you're open to everybody, then what?
What do you mean?
They can become part of our community.
Okay, so let's say the institution is white. So let's say this institution is white supremacist, right? The way to solve it is to integrate everyone into a white supremacist institution. To love everybody, everyone.
I don't know why you think. I think the cross-examination question was pretty clear about this. That the white supremacy is not loving. It is not opening. We are criticizing the ways in which it isn't, as well as the ways the affirmative isn't.
Everybody good? Okay.
Here's our answer to your social location argument. Privileging social location elides the fact that one's social location does not determine their actions to suggest it does recreates domination. This is Carter's 98. So argument has access to a wellspring of experience and not others through inclusion of a particular category when elevated theoretically makes a strong ontological claim which faces the differences between people in the same category. Such claims are subjectivism in which everyone's voice must be treated equally. This privileging employs the same power movements of universalizing reach. The structure of argument bears a strange resemblance to the notion of individual sovereignty and libertarian reason. Too much is conflated in the concept of neglected voice. There is no doubt that the experiences different social locations can apply different kinds of experience. What's been less well theorized is the extent to which differences in experiences are affected by social location always imply differences in the order of massive experience. This distinction is too easily elided by those who would respond to the predominance of white decision makers with the fact that the white social policy of our point is not to suggest the standpoints of dominating groups are automatically incorporated, but merely to question the extent to which a distinctive view of the social order necessarily flows from a particular social location. It may be true policy tends to enact the interests of dominating groups, but does not follow that these interests of other groups cannot be framed within the same discourse. The construction of social location causes to question the claim of self-identity to subvert modern reason from without. Now, the revolution arguments. Listen, our argument is that there will be the arguments against exclusion until there is nobody else to exclude. You will fight white supremacy until white supremacy ends. At that point, you start to cannibalize by demonizing those who stand with you, like Fort Hays State University, and cannibalizing the very community that you are a part of. Our Time magazine evidence indicates that it causes the term revolution and the use of revolution as a political action causes a violent action that excludes those who would be willing to stand with you. Our evidence cites a liberal political scientist at San Francisco State University who is attacked just because he's part of the establishment. Here is some more evidence as to how revolutionary politics fail. The term of revolution should be avoided because it distracts our focus from what needs to be changed and becomes counterproductive. This is May of 2000. The term revolution strikes me as a loaded one and is better avoided. The term is used as a manner of mark for most radicalism. As such, it hides the question which we should be asking. What needs to be changed and how does it need to be changed? And calling their aesthetic revolution creates a dogmatic approach, a closed off kind of perspective that allows incorporating other perspectives and making adjustments. This is Hutchinson 96. Revolutionary leadership includes commitments to humility, perspective of knowledge construction, a healthy dose of doubt that one's group may have, and right, the decision minority not hard to shed. All extend our grief's evidence now. This evidence is the violent knowledge. This evidence is that the revolution is necessarily violent. Our evidence indicates that their starting point as oppositional politics is necessarily a violent knowledge. The meaning of the word is based on to revolve, which revolves around a single issue. And the second part is about the overthrow of a regime, which means that their revolutionary aesthetic is the violent change of the community. It pushes against those who they wish to support. Our topless evidence is about oppositional politics. This evidence indicates that assailing the organization and the debate community will fail. Now, our evidence literally says that there is no chance of success for your movement, which is why there has to be openness and love. It becomes absorbed. Their movement becomes absorbed into the power structure. Description is merely a means of covering up the problem that does not allow them to solve. Here is more evidence that the revolutionary politics fails and makes reform impossible. This is Time magazine. Revolution is a serious business with a terrible but often heroic tradition. It must be reserved for situations of extreme despair, when no other recourse is possible. Playing it when it is neither possible nor necessary only makes reform harder to achieve and gives revolution a bad name. Now here is some solvency evidence for our alternative. Our alternative solves best. This is Angela Davis, 2000. Sandoval designs a method for emancipation that builds bridges across theoretical chasms and creates strategies. This provides us with a series of methods for creating social movements and identities that are capable of speaking. Her theory joins with the methodology of their press, and together these methods create social action she calls love in the postmodern world. This is necessary for understanding ourselves, each other, and the nature of being in collectivity. Rooted in her knowledge of activism, Sandoval's book is a map for understanding how to affect dissidence. Spanos. Your Spanos evidence is an argument against the epistemology argument about how everything comes from white supremacy and everything has to be part of a white aesthetic. Listen, Spanos is probably part of the white aesthetic. He is a professor at a major university, which means that we are reading a multitude of authors, including African American activists like Angela Davis, which is a reason as to why your argument about white supremacy and epistemology of our arguments does not apply to us. Plus, your Spanos evidence is just wrong. Debate challenges American imperialism and neoconservatism by questioning radical ideology. Our evidence is empirical and really damn good. This is English et al. 7. Rather than acting as a cultural technology expanding American acceptabilism, switch-side debating serves as a bulwark against fundamentalism. Several voices reshaping the national dialogue on homeland security have come from the academic debate community. Catchall served as the lead plaintiff's counsel in Compton. Catchall's collaborated with former debate champion Tribe. The imprint of debate trading is evident. Interventions which are characterized by meticulous research, sound argumentation, and staunch commitment to democratic principles. The success of former debaters in challenging the dominant dialogue on homeland security points to the efficacy of academic debate as a training ground for future advocates of progressive change. A robust understanding of the switch-side technique would help prevent misappropriation of that technique to bolster suspect homeland security policies. Buried within debaters' files is a secret threat to absolutism, the refusal to be classified as with us or against us, the embracing of intellectual experimentation and reflexivity in the face of fundamentalism. Additionally, not everything in debate comes from the white aesthetic. It can be productive. This is Ritter and 6. Failure to engage only increases the likelihood of war with Iran. A failure to have a debate, dialogue, or discussion on the totality of issues that comprise U.S.-Iranian relations means that in the minds of American electorate, the only issue that defines U.S.-Iran relations is the nuclear issue. Americans view nuclear issues from the perspective of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of children hiding under desks during civil defense drills, and as the potential bringer of global holocaust. Whenever any nuclear is raised, it is done from a negative context, void of balance. The reality has to be exploited to the maximum extent possible by the Bush administration when it comes to the issue of Iran. Iran is a nation awash in a sea of oil and natural gas, and as such has no legitimate claim for a nuclear energy program. We are not made cognizant of the reality and inherent complexity of nuclear energy so that we can better understand what it is Iran is trying to accomplish. For most Americans, use of the term nuclear does not engender visions of peaceful energy, but rather horrific destruction. It is this pre-inclination toward negativity that allows the Bush administration to get away with an extremely sophomoric approach toward assessing Iran's pursuit of the atom.
641.
Alright, y'all ready? Oh, well. I'm going to the critique stuff. Go on to case. Alright? Okay.
Look, it's across the framework that the who best engaged in consistent practice of advocacy and advancing liberation of the press. All that evidence is assuming black liberation theology. That's not what we are. We're talking about liberation of the press, which is in the context of Pierre arguments. That is not, there are actual evidence that Della Rosa evidence is not even talking about any type of free pedagogy. He's talking about black liberation theology that's not linked to us. At the same time, we're not ever claiming to call anybody a Tom or a seller because they don't engage in our argument. What we're saying is that we increase a type of revolutionary aesthetic that allows us to actually embrace these type of things. Their critique of the word of revolution is not in the context of us at all. We're talking about the revolutionary aesthetic that Spanos was talking about within this activity that needs to actually occur. Their revolution is something that's talking about a violent revolution that we're not even trying to claim. Also, this whole debate on a critique, don't even vote on the actual alternative because they don't give you any specific evidence of how this is going to solve within the debate community, how love and embracing these ethics and things that are just actually change these type of things. They read some Sandoval evidence and Angela Davis evidence. It's not even the context of the Della Ria evidence. So don't make them actually connect those type of arguments and make them actually assume those type of things. They also drop these disadds to the actual evidence. Number one, we said their alternative is a colorblind mentality that doesn't truly interrogate the purposes of white supremacy as well as this type of thing. So they only brush all those issues into the Diallo evidence. It talks about how they can never be able to engage those type of policies to break down this white supremacy structure. Also, they have no specific methodology. It talks about how they can access the debate community. All these arguments are disconnected. It's the same type of link that we talk about. These objective, disconnected narrative. So it's across the Mills evidence because the Mills evidence talks about how the centrality of white racism needs to actually be made the global dividend framework that should never answer to this round. Furthermore, they are more a utopian view that never actually changed the politics. Also, another deficit to that type of advocacy is that the fact that they said they're not even going to advocate in each and every round, the fact that they're not going to be consistent. When people actually start with movements and things of that nature, they always advocate them consistently. Their one speech act within this round is not going to do anything to change the type of fundamental. All their arguments on this type of flow is talking about a bunch of these ad hominem arguments instead of what we're going to do. Don't actually allow those to be articulation because they're nonsensical arguments. Also, extend across our permutation because our permutation works best because we're able to access a lot of the office that they talk about because we're talking about how we're not trying to determine people's identities. What we're saying is they can actually self-determine their own identities under revolutionary aesthetic that allows them to address the type of harms and problems that they talk about. All these arguments are not ones that are offensive against us, especially when he talks about this woman case. We're talking about how we need to assume that these type of problems will happen under our advocacy. We don't see them as assimilated. When we're talking about from our social location, that some of the practices in northern procedures cited in the Hill evidence talks about how some black people get assimilated to a system that doesn't truly allow them to break free from that. A lot of black people who came from this activity talk about these type of instances. They will deny social location of people. It's exactly another reason why they will not be able to work under liberation of press because they deny people their identity. Extend across the Hooks evidence that talks about how radical black subjectivity is what is needed. We want to have a type of hedge against the type of white imperialist system. They never engage in the answer to this argument. Talks about how we have to have these type of debates and talk about these things. And furthermore, think that they're only protecting privilege on this flow because the fact that they don't want to ever talk about race and how it's conception within this mentality, within this debate activity, only be a white solution that is not going to truly work. This will be a piecemeal solution that is not going to that. It's not a piece. It's just a piecemeal solution. Also, our permutation will be able to solve all the white aesthetic, solve all the white aesthetic art. Solve all the white aesthetic art. There are the declarative mentality which actually increases the inclusivity and the visibility of white supremacy and racism. The Mills evidence. We also think that their art has no methodology.
Now on to case.
First of all, group the top of this debate where they talk about how we say white supremacy is going to be solving all these type of issues. What we're saying is that it's a starting point. It's a better starting point than what they outline us with. They only talk about embracing the ethic of love that doesn't get to any concrete solutions. They talk about how oppression exists within society and white racism has been one that's refuted. They never talk to you about the problems that exist here, how we can break those things down. They only give you this colorblind, whitewashed, utopian way of looking at the world. We become more realistic, but we're talking about this moment in time right now. White supremacy is pervading our activity. Ascend across the Mills evidence talking about how they are in epistemology of ignorance, how they're only looking at one way the verb. Judges do not trust that type of evidence. Do not trust them in themselves because the fact that they are the ones that are trying to paint us as the enemies. They're blaming the victims of this activity. They never break down any type of coalition or build coalition with us. Furthermore, the type of argument when they talk about Fort Hays and things of that nature, we said in that Fort Hays round that the fact that they excluded Shannara from the ballot is the reason why they should not have actually picked up their round because they excluded more black voices from out of the judging panel. We think that those type of things, the practices, or that level of discomfort is something needed in this activity. It allows us to harness some type of change and transgress the problems that we talk about here. They only allow the silence on these type of issues. That only allows the same type of things that Diallo talks about, how we only deny the significance of racial positions and never engage in a way to break those things down. They only increase the white aesthetic as well as white supremacy, extend the neo arguments because the fact that they link to the neo argument says that nothing meaningful can come out of white aesthetic. In fact, is exactly what the alternative is. It is the white aesthetic. And they'll never be able to break down any type of forms of racial inferiority. Also, group out a lot of this identity politics debate as well as this binary debate. What we're saying is that we do not actually procure discussions about race and other forms of oppression. The Mills evidence is indicative that white supremacy is a central political system that we always gloss over. Also, race-based politics are an essential component of this discussion. Me and Davon are black males. We have to have orientation within that social location. All their arguments about social location are only do not trust them because the fact that they're only trying to protect never allowed to talk about race and white racism and things of that nature. That is the Mills evidence is conceded again that talks about how we need a global theoretical framework to address those type of things. The Davis evidence is something that is not going on that side because of the fact that Davis would advocate talking about yourself as a revolution. She was a former Black Panther, for God's sake. She was talking about how we need to engage in feminist politics as well as Black Panthers, as well as all these type of revolutionary aesthetics. So that some type of revolution argument would cut back against them because of the fact that Angela Davis talks about, revolutionary politics. We don't paint anyone as enemies. What we're saying is that we, as a community, have a responsibility to talk about these issues right here and right now. So all their arguments are not functionally a way to vote against us. Spanos is not a part of white aesthetic. He's just making an observation of this activity through the way that we blend the mechanism of revolutionary politics to be able to address those type of claims. They cannot actually do that. The power actually solves those type of arguments best.
What do you got?
Hey Blake, can you see if Nicole's doing this?
Kennedy?
Not that.
Yeah, only if you...
No. I got the I got 40.
Agreed, right. Alright.
The off case page. And then the case page.
I'm not sure what he's talking about when he says that we don't answer their argument about a framework to engage the liberation of oppression. This is exactly the link to the Delaria evidence about criticizing liberation. It whitewashes liberation because it assumes it only comes from the standpoint of criticizing white supremacy. It liberates all other forms of oppression, but is only open to the contingencies of different types of oppressions through the form of criticizing white supremacy. What if I want to criticize heteronormative oppression that might occur in the debate community? It can only be understood analogous to the possibility of liberation to the oppressed from the particular standpoint of the what he sees. If the ballot for Towson is the pinnacle of liberation and freedom, our Davis evidence is a question to this message, be able to challenge oppression and understand ourselves in the community. I'll answer our comfort arguments here. They take comfort in the identities that are imposed on us. Our negation argument on the case page is exactly this. We take comfort in the identity that's imposed on us by white supremacy, only positing ourselves in negation to that. They make an argument about how we're colorblind. We're not saying that you shouldn't speak in terms of your social location, but only in terms of how you set up your revolutionary aesthetic in terms of your particular social location. You pretend as if you don't impose stereotypes on other people, how you pretend that you presume to know who we are just because we participate in a certain type of debate that privileges fiat or illusory concepts that the United States federal government acting as if that cannot give us agency. This presumption is exactly the colorblindness you're talking about, but I think the alternative will solve that argument later. They say that we're not arguing this in each round. This is the link to our only debate arguments. You should not vote for Kansas because we don't seek for diversity, because we don't read this particular argument in every single debate round. What about other forms of opening spaces for diversity within the debate community? What about the community of Kansas debate itself that has become so entrenched in the community at large, and I think done so much to help diversity, not only for ourselves, but for the community itself. Just because we have a certain argument style in certain rounds is not a reason to reject us. What is the permutation? It is love and openness, but with the infusion of revolutionary ethics in the 1AC. I don't think that it necessarily sounds any different than the 1AC itself. It says that it is open but thrives on rejection of a white aesthetic or potentially revolutionary partners. It says it is loving but presumes to know the identity of everyone by their relative association with a particular white aesthetic. The perm is not open or loving, and the affirmative should be considered as such. It says it is endless with the ballot, but ignores how rejection inherently informs politics whenever we establish it with identity. It claims to establish
establish a form of identity, but only does so in opposition. The alternative is not an endorsement of traditional debate structures. It is not an endorsement of the white aesthetic and everything that has happened in the debate community that was a particular. That's why we ask those questions in the 1AC. It is not a criticism of the argument we're making. Instead, we are also criticizing the way the debate community functions. It is not open. It is not loving. And this is what we're criticizing. But it also applies to the 1AC. We are informing ourselves for politics to battle oppression, and we're trying to provide you the best alternative. This also means that you should not necessarily reject debate out of hand. It does have potentially revolutionary potential, even within traditional debate concepts like fiat or writ or evidence as public discussions about what the United States federal government should do in the context of striking Iran has the potential to break down neoconservative politics that your Spanos evidence criticizes. The potential to have revolutionary politics through fiat proves how debate itself, or maybe Stone and I myself, or the Kansas debate community itself should not necessarily be rejected out of hand, but it also has revolutionary potential. Being open to all of these different forms of politics is what the alternative is. Okay. Their argument about not trusting us is exactly the inherent problem of our movement. This was the double-bind argument I made in the 2NC. If we try to find effective political strategies with them, then we're painted as racist, trying to get them within the white aesthetic. But if we stand in opposition, obviously we're also bigoted and racist as well. This is a no-win situation for a coalition-building type of politics. Our root cause argument, also probably a good example of this, indicates that when we only focus on racism, it obfuscates other oppressions. It believes that we've challenged all forms of oppression and all forms of identity construction by singularly focused on criticizing white supremacy in the first place. Inevitably, we do not criticize ourselves because we're not open to other forms of aesthetics. They make this argument about uncomfort, but they did not answer the turn of this argument. Our negation, Walter's evidence indicates that it is only given credence because it is dominated by the white aesthetic itself. It is spoken from an aesthetic that is based on negation itself. The only way it is given identity at all is through opposition, not through its own form, not through its own identity, and not through a particular social location. The revolutionary politics that they are endorsing are only in opposition. They are not in proactivity. The social location argument, we're not criticizing necessarily speaking from your own identity. We're criticizing the way that your social location so powerfully comes to subsume all things. The Angela Davis argument is a pretty good example of this. It indicates that revolutionary politics are something that she turned away from because they were not effective, because they were so rejected. What are politics of revolution? Of course they are of change and hope and possibility, but revolution also implies rejection. Of course, sometimes it is the KKK and the murders of Matthew Shepard that we must accept, but just as often it's a person implicated by mere association with a certain dominant paradigm. The people who so passionately and avidly agree with what you say, and when they're told that their contribution is simply not as valuable, not as important, not experienced through possession, your movement divides and your politics splinters. That's when revolution fails. We endorse a politics of love and openness. It does not create a practice form on revolution, a violent overthrow of the dominant order. We're not saying don't take a stand, but be mindful of who you alienate. It does not so haphazardly throw to the side those who would stand beside us. It does not tell Auntie, Wichita State, or the Fourth they don't deserve to be victorious. It does not think that competition winning and emerging victorious are the true barometers of practical success. It does not think that Towson should presume that they have material change the community because they've won a couple ballots. But we offer a separate framework. It's about openness and it's about love. It's about taking on the bigots and racists and sexists and oppressions with loving and not confrontation. When their videos played to the Baltimore UDL, when the word of this round spreads and hopefully touches the lives of others in our community, when the laboratory of theory moves to the politics of practicality, the question we should be asking ourselves is not how, the question we're asking ourselves with the app is not how we should liberate the press, but with the negative, it's how to best do that.
Debaters who best engages in the consistent practice of advocacy that advances the liberation of the oppressed. It gives us the tools to be able to use this activity as a means to transform the society that pervades the kind of imperialist notions that Spanos talks about, the ways in which this activity perpetuates these disinterested argumentative skills that don't give us the ability to understand our relationship to the policy that we're actually talking about, which means that the point where our alternative and the permutation allows us to be able to have a methodology for transforming the community and also having a possibility of transforming the community and the community outside of this particular debate space. It gives us the ability to change the type of policies and cause the type of oppression and imperialism that exists in our society. Specifically on the particular critique. First of all, this argument talks about the ways in which we inscribe identities based specifically and solely on the ideology of white supremacy. First of all, our argument is that we have to understand ourselves in relation to the dominant political phenomenon that exists in our society, which is white supremacy. Our argument is that as a result of the place that we occupy in history, the type of society that is dominated by European and American colonialism, we have to recognize the ways in which this affects our lives and understand our subjectivity in relation to it, or else we don't have the effective analytical skills to challenge the very white supremacy that exists in our society. Also, the evidence is specific to liberation theology that doesn't assume the ways in which we engage in liberation of the oppressed or our revolutionary aesthetics. Also, revolutionary aesthetics are also individuals to determine their own way in which they engage in this activity. They can use their own subjectivity in ways in which they identify within this white supremacist structure in order to transform the very pedagogy in this activity that doesn't allow us to transform the conditions outside of it. Also, they weren't really responsive to our arguments about how people are allowed to take comfort in their identity. Look, our argument is that we must talk about race in relation to whiteness in order to effectively understand the way in which it exists, particularly in our society. They make arguments how we impose particular types of stereotypes. This goes into the D'Angelo evidence that my partner talks about in the one area, specifically talks about when people talk about individual instances of racism or feeling offended individually, it takes away from institutional critiques that are necessary in transforming conditions that exist in society. So our argument isn't about talking about stereotypes of individuals, how they're perceived, but rather the institutions that create the phenomena that perpetuate the oppression that cause not just exclusion, but the type of the ideology that justifies imperialism that doesn't allow us to transform the society into one that is health. They make arguments about how they've increased diversity or the cancers help to increase diversity. I don't know much about the program to say whether they have or haven't, but the argument is about the ways in which we engage in debate and how we can change the way in which we talk at discussions so we can criticize the practice that we engage in and change the way in which we interact in this particular activity. Also, they make arguments how we establish opposition. They make arguments how we establish opposition, that identity establishes kind of oppositionalities. Argument is that this type of criticism of identity politics maintains white supremacy and decreases the ability to engage in the radical black subjectivity that is necessary. This is a Hooks evidence that decreases our ability to engage in the radical black subjectivity is necessary to fight white supremacy, which means that their argument maintains white supremacy and the ability of it to perpetuate itself. Also, the Mills evidence specifically talks that the alternative is problematic for a few reasons. First of all, the alternative doesn't have any particular solvency. There's no particular methodology from which love can transform the pedagogy in this activity. So specific methodology they can point to and say this will transform the pedagogy in this activity. Therefore, there's absolutely no solvency on the alternative. The permutation is the best way to solve because another disadvantage of the alternative is that it's colorblind, and that this colorblindness perpetuates the invisibility of white supremacy. It's the Mill evidence that talks about the ways in which white supremacy is made invisible by not talking about it. Our argument is that without it being the center of discussion, it perpetuates the invisibility of white supremacy and decreases our ability to challenge it. Therefore, our permutation allows for us to embrace this ethic of love. We don't hate people in this activity or hate individuals in this activity, and we want to embrace, even in those rounds early on today, we don't hate any other people that exist in this activity, but it's important as intellectuals in this activity to challenge the institution and its ability to pervade white supremacy because we have to challenge it or also continue to pervade itself, and it's important for us to be able to do so. We don't claim the ballot as a means to magically transform the community, but a way in which people can be more critical, and the more that we get to these debates, and the more people that sit and watch these debates can actually be more reflective and critical about the ways and the things that they participate in. Also, their silence on white supremacy creates a kind of inverted epistemology that the other piece of Mills evidence suggests, and we have to transform this community by rejecting the flawed epistemologies that don't allow us to transform the very conditions that allow us to embrace the revolutionary aesthetics. Their case arguments. So they make specific arguments that it affects. First of all, they make this double bind argument. Look, our argument is that if their methodology for challenging white supremacy is bad, then they should lose the debate. That's not a double bind. We're not saying you're always going to be racist. We're saying that in a society that is white supremacist, you have to make that the center of your analysis in order to effectively challenge white supremacy. If not, then you'll perpetuate the invisibility of it, which is the Mills evidence. They make arguments about how the fact that we're taking the kind of inscribed identity that's been given to us by colonialism, re-inscribes white supremacy. Our argument is that the way in which the white aesthetic works, we have to recognize the fact that we're saturated in it and seek to transform it and revolutionize it. If we don't understand the ways in which we relate in the context of whiteness, and we don't have the ability to transform it, we kind of ignore the very phenomena that created the kind of inscriptions of identity. And allows individuals, the revolutionary aesthetic allows us to use these identities as ways to understand white supremacy and transform it, that allows this activity to be a space where we don't continue to perpetuate the kind of neoconservative agenda that promotes imperialism. They're making these arguments about people who become divided as a result. This also, you can apply the Anglo evidence specifically here, where it talks about the ways in which these people feeling alienated as a result of our arguments goes to show that it's a protection of white supremacy and white privilege. It allows people to not have these discussions. Our argument is that if people are not willing to talk about white supremacy, then they shouldn't be in the coalition, because it is essential to be able to challenge white supremacy for individuals that want to challenge it, since it's the core phenomenon that causes the type of oppression that exists. And if we look at our moment in history, it's important to recognize that it's the type of European and American colonialism that dominates the world. They make arguments about how Angela Davis stepped away from identity politics. First of all, this isn't true. Second of all, her use of identity is more nuanced in the ways in which she understands racism. And she's written articles about the ways in which jazz was a means for women to be able to talk about the ways in which capitalism affected the use of their bodies and the way they're represented. So she talks about the ability for racism to be a means for us to understand the society that exists at large. As a result, you vote for the permutation that gives us the ability to brace this ethic of love, while at the same time having a methodology to challenge white supremacy. And there's no offense in the case arguments. At best, the case arguments reinscribe white supremacy and take away our ability to challenge it. The affirmative permutation has the best possibility for transforming the conditions with a particular methodology that can be used and applied and can use to challenge forms of domination in the society.
everyone's here. Congratulations on participation in the final round of the team national tournament. On the affirmative, in the round between the affirmatives from Towson, Devin Cooper and Davon Love, and the negative, Nate Johnson and Chris Stone, the decision is a 7-4 for the affirmative from
I can make it fast. I thought that this was a simple decision. I thought that the alternative solved 100% of the harm isolated by the case. It's the precise opposite of white supremacy. I didn't feel like there was a very clear explanation of the warrant for the how or the why. The starting point of white supremacy is critical to solve. The argument in the 2AR is that it reinscribed imperialism, but I still don't know why that is the case. I don't understand. And I do understand that love or inclusion would solve that. The permutation, I think, has several disadvantages to it, which means that it doesn't solve as well as the alternative. The primary one is identity. It creates division/exclusion. I think that this criticism of the way traditional debate starts from a white supremacy standpoint is not always correct. It can lead to liberation. I don't think that there's an answer to the Ritter or English evidence or the KU example in the 2AR. The other disadvantage is that it's a double bind. That argument is made on the top of the case in the 2AR. And I think that it also has the risk of splintering movements. The discomfort that you talk about in the 1AC, throughout all the speeches, I think might be key to solve, but it's accomplished through what I would describe as like alienation. I think that's an additional link to their splintering coalitions argument. So, I mean, I just thought the alt solved and the firm didn't solve as well. And congratulations to both teams.
I voted for the net case too. I saw things very differently from that decision. I voted primarily on the root cause arguments. I thought that the root cause case was practically dropped by the 2AR. You sort of just identified the Mills evidence as the answer to this. The Mills evidence says that it is an important part of the oppression of the black aesthetic, but I don't think that it identifies it as the root cause of all oppressions. And I think that the reduction of aesthetics to oppositional politics that is really important, that your aesthetics are then reduced to an opposition to whiteness, which decreases the likelihood that we get on to talking about the liberation of other oppressed folks that likely exist. That determinism is dangerous to a strategy to solve oppression. I thought that their oppositional politics argument was, you sort of just dealt with it by it's necessary to deal with race. And their argument was, what about everybody else? And I sort of thought that the net best strategy for dealing with the whole of oppression was the negative strategy of love and inclusion. I agree with the Aft case that it is difficult to identify what the method of this is for the negative, but I'm certain that the Aft strategy of reduction of oppression to whiteness is very dangerous, and I'm also not certain that your strategy is particularly progressive in terms of generating a politics. Their question about what does this mean for, how do we rebuild politics afterward, as opposed to just tearing down the white aesthetic, what will we do later? I've heard you all talk about the politics of black aesthetics and radical aesthetics much more clearly in terms of what ought we to do to build a debate community that looks differently, as opposed to eliminate things that look bad. And I thought that in this instance, you talked way too little about a progressive future and way too much about a destruction of white power. And so I thought that the next strategy was more likely to generate a progressive future.
I also voted negative, and I agree a lot with what Jason's saying. For me, ultimately, I also think that this Walters evidence is able to engage your Mills evidence. It specifically talks about the singularities that you create, replicating paradigms of oppression. I really don't think that that is an argument that's answered. Just something else to add, I think that the 2AR needs to be extending a majority of these pieces of evidence within the context of the permutation as opposed to the context of the 1AC, because I think ultimately a lot of what's going on in the 2NR, for me, the crafting of this as a permutation, specifically the Walters evidence, the root cause evidence, and the political splintering arguments, I think it disable you to be able to access an internal link to what inevitably for me becomes your potential dissent to the alternative. And I also think that this Deloria evidence is quite good, creating sort of the whitewashing of liberation argument as also a potential dissent to the permutation. So ultimately I think that the alternative becomes a more viable option because I think you don't have an ability to be able to access an internal link to the impact solved by the alternative via the permutation, absent sort of an answer to this root cause argument, which I really do not have through the entirety of the debate.
I also agree with a lot of what Russell said. I vote on the oppositional politics argument. I think that you probably have to win a pretty good race of your white centrality, white supremacy argument, given the overall framing of the 2AR. I read the Mills evidence on this question. I'm not sure it's all that good. I do think your Spanos evidence on this question is pretty good, but the conclusion that evidence draws is that would always be checked back by a revolution inside the debate, which begs the question of the function of the alternative. The second argument that I think that if you win, you probably win the debate is their method doesn't cause transformation inside of the debate. Now, the 2NR does a pretty good job of saying that your video's argument presupposes the efficacy of your alternative, which may or may not be true. I think you can say that the method of your affirmation is one that doesn't require necessarily that it doesn't involve an efficacy question on the part of your alternative, but rather is dependent upon a dissemination of that centrality question that's already talked about. So I decide that there's a linked argument to the oppositional politics K to the permutation, and that has 3 attacks. The first is that you make decisions about people in F groups based on stereotypes, which is they ran the women's app last year. The second is that you gloss over other forms of repression, and the third is this double bind argument. I don't think this is the best argument for y'all to make because this is the link to your discomfort argument. So if you would make this argument earlier, and that was a larger part of the 2AR, I think that would have gotten you a whole lot more.
Thank you. I voted for the affirmative. I'll start by saying that both sides would have been well served to deal with what happens if a judge thinks that the affirmative methodology fails and the alt doesn't solve either. How would I resolve that debate? Because I got to a point of the impasse where I felt like both sides were kicking the other's alt pretty good, but not really explaining what impacts might be. I'll give you an example for the negative, since I didn't vote for you, how you could want to debate. I think that the block makes an argument. It's not as explicit as it needs to be, but definitely posits the notion of some sort of, if they don't solve, they lose. And I thought the 2NR could have said, if we in the debate, we win any of our links about why their method is bad, don't worry about evaluating the alt, and don't give them the perm. You just sort of old school style. They position themselves in the 1AC as trying to solve a problem. And we argue that they don't solve it. Because for me, at least, the permutation gets them out of a lot of the links, the internal links to some of your impacts. And the reason why they win the permutation, the debate over Angela Davis was kind of interesting because it moved me to read that piece of evidence. And this is what that piece of evidence says. Her theory, talking about Sandoval, joins with the methodology of the oppressed, and together these methods create social action. That seems to be an affirmative piece of permutation evidence, which you might want to do a better job of reading the other things evidence. Both sides of the debate this, and I look at that and I'm like, okay, so it's possible to confirm. And the reason why I think this hurts is, but neither side defines what they're all like. They say you don't explain your all, and you're right. You say, okay, what's the perm? And so at the end of the debate, the judge has to fill that in either way, right? Either you're going to reject the perm or reject the alt. Either way you vote on that, the judge is going to have to do some work for somebody to decide what that is. So I think it would be better served in the 2NR and point out to the judges that we don't have to win the alt to win the debate. If we win, they screw things up, they make it worse. We can vote for that. For me in this debate, the app wins a net benefit of discomfort. There's only one piece of evidence in the debate that talks about the impact of discomfort. Like, there's assertions by the neg that the affirmative breaks down coalitions. Their D'Angelo evidence says specifically that discomfort is a good thing, and when it's said to be a bad thing, that is a move that maintains the system of white supremacy. And they referenced that in both the 1ER and the 2AR as an answer to the Walters evidence, along with Cook, which I didn't think really was that good of an answer, but the D'Angelo evidence is on point, and none of your evidence speaks to whether discomfort is a good thing or a bad thing. It's just sort of assumed to be, and that was not a useful assumption. I do think the negative wins a disad to the perm, which is this Walters argument at the level of oppositional identity, right? And I thought the 2NR could have made a bigger deal that the app sort of has misconstrued some of y'all's offense against them as all being how they hurt coalitions, but the argument you're making about oppositional identity is it hurts the black individual who has to constantly position themselves, right? If you had been able to weigh what the damage done to the AF methodology is with that, vis-a-vis they might be winning some of their it's okay to make people uncomfortable, then I can easily vote negative. Or if you say, this is all a wash, neither of the alts solve much of anything, they screw things up in the following ways, I'd be willing to vote negative on solvency. As it is, my RFD was the permutation creates some discomfort, which their winning is good, and potentially forces some oppositional identity that screws things up, right? Which way do those go? And ultimately sort of sided with the affirmative. Their evidence on whether the discomfort is good probably sucks up some of the impact of what that oppositional identity would be. So that was sort of why I ended up voting affirmative. But neither side really does a good enough job of impact calculus or weighing. It's one of those old school mistakes of assuming you've won all of your arguments. What if you don't win all of them? How would I vote? So the decision took me a lot longer than it should have. It all sort of sloppy in the last 3 votes. Like, for example, revolution, the 1AR says hardly anything there. And I was kind of thinking the 2NR was going to make a really big deal about it. And instead, all you extend is, when you're talking about Angela Davis, that she rejected revolutionary aesthetics because it was divisive. And I'm like, what about that it's violent, that it spurs, it forces violence, or all these sorts of things? And I cannot believe you've been running revolutionary aesthetics but you aren't here to defend revolution good. Right? Essentially, the negative in this round is the Rodney King strategy. Right? It is, can't we all just get along? And if you, as individuals who want to talk about black revolution, are not prepared to say, that's what white folks always say when they're afraid we're going to get their ass kicked, right? That is the move, is, hey, whoa, don't get violent on me. Can't we all just get along? That's the move. The negative is making this debate with their alternative. And if you aren't prepared to say, fuck that, we need a revolution, if that means some coalitions get fractured and some bodies are laying on the ground and that's what's necessary, then you should not be talking about revolution, right? Like, sometimes you got to hurt feelings, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. And I was very shocked that y'all didn't do that. And gave CEDA an entire level of debate that the 2NR didn't capitalize on as well as he could. So, anyway, there's some other stuff we can talk about, but that's basically just
for me, it's a question of whether or not I think permutation is possible, what the net benefit that is versus what the alternative is. I think they have a couple of disadds to the alternative and the question of what unconditional love is. The first for me is this inverted epistemology piece of evidence that indicates that the ways in which they epistemologies get articulated are such that they are done in a form of metaphysical abstraction that does not work in the world of the concrete. I think this is particularly true in the world of the alternative. It's just this unconditional love without an explanation, I think, ever, as to how this would actually operate. And I think this speaks to the question of the general, of the constant cross-examination question of what is this method? I get that it is an openness, but the very way in which that it is talked about is in a level of abstraction. I also think that this also speaks to the way in which their D'Angelo evidence talks about the way in which the universal is always used in the questions of discomfort to gloss over the particular and the singular individual, which seems to be the affirmative. That being said, I think there are some things you can win in terms of offense to just the 1AC proper that the unconditional love would be able to solve for. But I am hard-pressed as to what the impact is of this in terms of the evidence. For example, the Walters evidence indicates that it is a way, it would limit your ontological or your being in the world in references to hierarchies. I suppose this would be a way in which you would then link this to the broader explanation of the way that this operates in the debate, but I think that the pairing of a revolutionary aesthetic with an unconditional love would be able to be a way of being in the world that would solve back any of what this residual bad thing is. I also think in the terms of the Deloria evidence, you have not answered why they are a liberation theology proper. The first lines in the cards are liberation theology and such that they are a homogenization of all oppression. I think it is very clear that they are saying we at least can speak from the place that we are at. I think we need to do more work as to how then, I think you are doing the work in terms of your discussion of women in debate and a discussion of how those things work, but I don't think you have a question of how their attack is based almost solely in terms of institutional structures and those types of questions. In these ways, I don't know what your link is that the alt with the perm would not be able to overcome the impact of.
I vote on the permutation. I think that it's critical to use oppositional politics in this instance to create discomfort. I think their evidence indicates that unless we have that uncomfortable alienation, we will only deal with matters of racism superficially. And that's what I feel like is happening with the alternative, that it's a superficial attempt to deal with racism. So I think that they're winning net benefits, that when they include that alienation, which is where you're winning all your links from, that's actually reasons why they're more productive at breaking down racism. In terms of the oppositional politics argument, I didn't think it was applied particularly well in how that occurs in this debate. So how do they reinforce these dichotomies? How do they, specifically in this instance, actually cause what your scenario is in the piece of evidence? I think it's also not offensive. I think this indicates like some of their solvency might be taken out, but you don't actually say that by using oppositional politics they make racism worse. So I don't think it's an offensive claim, so I think you need to get it to that level. The root cause argument, or the intersectionality type arguments, I consistently get from the affirmative that they're about self-determination, and that each person chooses how they participate within that system of self-determination. So I don't think that they are saying we can't talk about other forms of oppression. They're saying that their radical black subjectivity, which is specific to their social location, is the way that they choose to respond to white supremacy. But I don't think it's a universalist claim about how other people have to respond. The Deloria evidence, I don't think they are this liberation theology that they're talking about. I don't have anywhere in the debate that I'm making claims that all people are victims or that all minorities are excluded. I don't think that they're universalizing that. Again, I think they're particular to their own self-determination movement. The Davis evidence is really good for the permutation. Again, like I totally agree, it's about exactly the permutation. It supports the AF and how we should combine your projects of methodology of the oppressed with the project that they advocate with revolution. The alternative I basically see is we should be open and loving to racists. And the only competition that you have at that point is that we should be open and loving to people that support white supremacy. And I think that the AF is pretty persuasive to me that we shouldn't be open and loving to those people. We should make them recognize the way that their race operates invisibly and make them feel uncomfortable so that they can actually move beyond it. And I think that, again, I think they're also winning the identity politics argument that we need to talk about radical black subjectivity. And I do agree with the framing that the alternative is colorblindness, because by being open to all and loving all, it means that we can't talk about white supremacy, because we can't talk about the fact that people are racist. So I agree with that framing. The alternative.
I also vote on the permutation. I think you would be able to win a lot of offense in this round, probably enough to win in a world in which you didn't have the alternative that you're going for at the end of the debate. The permutation seems to alleviate most all the links to the criticism as well as the case arguments. In a world in which we embrace opposition to a white aesthetic and maintain openness and love, which in the 1AR and the 2AR is basically explained to me as sort of the alt in every instance but the plan style permutation when you say do both. There's no reason to me after the 2 and R about why there's an impact against it. The permutation posits a revolutionary ethic against white aesthetics for the AF, and which we've already talked about why it is that that's important for their methodology to personally access resistance to the system, while it maintains openness and love for everyone else. This means that I agree with Hester that you made a mistake in the way that you characterized the impact to oppositional politics, because you did sort of allow the AF to couch it as more of an argument about coalitions and the ability to form them. If that's the main impact to oppositional politics at the end of the debate, the problem is that she's right, that essentially the permutation becomes we will be the only thing that will be oppositional to is white supremacy. Everything else that will be open and loving toward. And to me, there's not enough on the negative to prove what it is the risk of the impact is. And I also agree with Hester that largely both teams are sort of winning, that the other's alternative doesn't necessarily solve. And it's just sort of this game of nebulous assertions where they keep asking you and you don't really have an answer. It was funny to me because they asked you, like, what happens when we get rid of it all? And you're like, we haven't got there yet, we're not going to talk about that. And then, like, your first question to him after the 2 and C is, what happens when we fix everything? It's like, well, maybe that's not a relevant question anymore. But, so given that, though, I think the negative had a shot if they didn't have the alternative to just win some unique offense, because it seems like I gave you more of a risk of your Delaney evidence than the rest of the panel did so far. The problem is that the existence of the permutation means that if I choose the alternative alone, there's no method that guarantees the analytical tools needed to challenge white supremacy are available to debaters. And then finally, the thing that really got me was that you don't have any evidence that disproves that white supremacy has become the theoretical framework that couches our existence. Your root cause evidence is okay. The problem is the impact of the root cause evidence is that if we become too deterministic, we'll lose the will to resist. And I just don't see anything that the AF is doing or any reason the negative has as to why that will become a result of the AF, because they're the ones saying that they want to maintain consistency through every round. And I don't hold it against you that you don't argue this every round, but the fact that they personally want consistency seems to be a reason why there isn't really an impact to the root cause argument, especially in lieu of the permutation.
I'll go to that one. And I largely agree with what most people before me have said. I think Hester really summarized my decision-making process pretty accurately. I'll go through that really quickly and give some other suggestions. I vote on the permutation, and I think the reading of the Davis evidence is a turning point in my decision-making calculus, when literally the evidence says we should use the methodology of the oppressed, which is every time the NED tries to generate links against the AF argument, they say we're not liberation theology, we're pedagogy of the oppressed. And so at that point, I don't know why the alternative to the criticism is that fundamentally different than what the affirmative advocates, aside from your attempt to generate links to their advocacy. And I think that the affirmative case is much more nuanced than you would like to give them credit for. You kind of want to paint them into this area, this box. They're not exactly doing what you're saying they're doing. That it's not as clearly oppositional as you'd like it to be. And I'll say something different than what other people are saying. I don't think you have to paint it as clearly oppositional. The Warren Hill evidence that you play at the beginning of the debate is coming out of Rasta theology. In fact, I even call it theology. Rastas probably wouldn't agree with that. And love and revolution are the same thing within that social movement. It is a revolution of love. One love, Jah love, right? And they're revolutionaries. They don't discard the label of revolutionaries. But the negative wants to keep assigning this assumption of a violent revolution to you. And I don't think you have to say violent revolution if you're saying revolution. And you can make that much more nuanced than you do in the debate. I think ultimately, aside from what's going on in the permutation, I agree with what Malcolm just said. I don't think you have very credible answers at the epistemological and methodological level of this whiteness argument as it being the screen for debate and the debate community. And I think the affirmative argues at a much more specific level of the existence of race, structural racism within the community. And I don't think I necessarily have to call you individual racist and reject you as racist in order to agree that there is structural inherent racism within the community. And their evidence talks about us presuming that neutrality exists as a way to conceal our privilege and not acknowledge our privilege. And at the point that there's no significant answer to those types of methodological arguments, I think it's really hard for me to give you a lot of ground on the link arguments you're trying to win. Saying that we just need to be open or we just need to love doesn't answer their evidence that we can't wish away race. Right? It just doesn't go away. And we walk down the halls and people look at us in a certain way. Just saying we love you doesn't change how that actually happens in a very real instance. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily did anything wrong, but it does mean that we as a community need to deal with that, even if it's uncomfortable to deal with that. And I think that's ultimately the net benefit that the affirmative keeps winning. That it's an uncomfortable discussion. Let's admit that from the beginning, that it's an uncomfortable discussion, but it's not a reason to not talk about it. And I think that's like one of the most motivating and compelling arguments I get from the affirmative, throughout the consistency, consistently in the debate. I do think that the Walters evidence and the Deloria evidence are the kind of the best arguments you have going for you in the debate. But I do generally think that their uncomfortability arguments, racial discomfort, kind of gets back at that. And I was really kind of concerned with the question of the root cause argument, but I don't have like a very clear extension and explanation of that piece of evidence at the end of the debate. I read it, but only because other judges started asking for it. But originally on my list of cards that I was going to read, it wasn't on the list of cards that I was going to read.
I think your strategy would have been exceptionally smart and phenomenally well executed had you been affirmative. I think that the fact that you have to try to generate competition with an alt is what gets you into trouble. And so a couple things. I think that your letting the AF too much characterize the question of what the ballot means and what the filter should be that I use to decide who wins the debate. They say at the top of the 1AR, at the top of the 2AR, the framework for this debate is who has the consistent strategy that best advances the liberation of the oppressed. And I think there needs to be a point in the 2NR where you head-on deal with that. You can do this a couple ways, I think. One is what other people have talked about, like maybe not even going for the alt. Say, we're kicking out of our alt, we'll concede this framework argument that it's about, I guess we can sort of concede that the debate should be about whether or not the AF successfully advances the cause of the liberation of the oppressed. We have some Ds. I think that would probably be sufficient for me to vote for the neg case. But I think that your alt can't solve without being Plan Plus is the problem. I think that they have a couple of arguments that necessitate the inclusion of the AF for the alt to be successful. One is something that people talk about a lot, which is the discomfort argument. I think that they're pretty good at winning the argument that, the explicit inclusion of a discussion of white supremacy and race explicitly on its own terms, not as part of a sort of universal love, but explicitly on its own terms, is critical in confronting the way white supremacy works. This sort of dovetails with the second argument, which is that unless it is made explicit, white supremacy remains a framework in the background for all of the stuff that happens in debate that we never understand as political because of the way it structures privilege. I think their Mills evidence is pretty good on this argument that unless the frame of white supremacy that exists in American debate, etc., is taken on sort of head-on, then it will sort of always just remain in the background, and the backgroundness is what makes it insidious and harmful. I think that other people have talked about basically the way I feel as far as what defense the AF wins to a lot of your arguments. I think that one thing that frames a lot of their defense for me to your DAs is what they keep repeating as their argument that, we have a revolutionary aesthetic, but that's not the only thing the 1AC is about. The 1AC is also about the fact that we think people should sort of opt into the revolutionary aesthetic from their social location, which I think gives them some pretty substantial defense to things like Deloria, the homogenization of the oppressed, etc., the root cause DA. I think that, like everyone else has said, you do have a good argument with your Walters evidence, et cetera, that defining race in oppositional terms is bad. One problem I think that, the way I thought about that is that it seems to me like race is defined in oppositional terms now, that there's a dominant white culture that itself defines, a subordinate other culture in opposition to itself, and that I think they win that. Trying to, I don't know what the alt to that is. That if the alt to that is colorblindness, then they have DAs to that. And if the alt to that is something else, then I don't think it's explained in a way that I can hang my hat on. So, like I said, I think that a lot of your arguments are couched in terms of don't reject us, and I think that you spend too much time on the don't reject us component of the argument, which would be, like I said, which would be, perfectly sufficient if you were affirmative, but you have to deal, I think, in a way that is more able to take on the positive parts of the affirmative. Right? And so then I think that ultimately, like I said, the attempt to generate, or the necessity of generating competition is.
I'll be very clear. I voted the same way on this bill. I voted half on the fermentation. I agree with the majority of what the minister has already said. I think that the benefits outweigh the dislikes of fermentation. I think if you had gone just for this argument without the alternative and some of these arguments, I think that the negative is going ahead, not just in terms of like the negative case arguments being good, but also as a reason why just to reject your middle solve their bad arguments. But I think the alternative kind of hurts you because it allows the access to fermentation and this debate round. I think the case arguments are really troublesome because I'm not sure how the communication of that is also with us. As well as, like, for instance, I'll reference the root cause argument. I don't think the impact is at all explained as a reason to vote against them, especially because I don't think the impact of that argument is what they have their form of paralysis or something like that. I think if the 2NR or anywhere in the speaker you had better arguments to like their issues or key to their movement, or key to successful change, I think you probably want a better form that your criticism has the evidence that they can't solve them. Because they're not shy about saying that we create oppositional politics and we destroy people to get on board with this, or destroy the possibility that they're on board with this. I just don't think that there's impact the coalition building in this debate round. That's explained well enough to we're going to go for it. I think that the alternative is permutable, and I don't think that it is well enough explained how to solve the Avalon minus the permutation. So voted F.